And we should be live.
Yep, we are.
Okay. Yeah. All right,
Fantastic.
We are good to start, Philip.
Cool. Let's go for it. I'm just going to give us a tick. Because Sri, for some reason, your camera's off, so I can't share you.
It's fine. I have switched on my camera.
Okay.
Okay, I can switch it on. Yep.
There we go. Now I can present you. There we go.
Cool. Hi all, welcome to our first AzureDIY session. I think we have got the attendees right now and we are going to start. So I'm Shrey from Microsoft, and in our today's session, we will be talking about Azure DevTestLabs, which is a developer service. When we look at creating all the developer environments currently on-prem, in most of the cases, there are some of the key challenges that we face. First of them is like longer infrastructure wait, the higher infrastructure cost, longer developer productivity, and also like obviously it lowers the developer productivity. So today what we have is like we have got Jack Latrobe from Servian, and he will be taking us through the DevTestLab. He's going to do a demo, show how actually it can reduce all the infrastructure wait time and also the infrastructure cost and make the developer productivity a lot better. Alongside, we also have Philip, Beck, and Amanda from Microsoft who are joining me and are going to answer to all your questions. So feel free to post your questions alongside the session in your Q&A block that you see on your team's side. And also for your information, this session is recorded and we will be posting it whenever we have time. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Shree. G'day, everyone. Thank you all for coming along. My name is Jack. I'm from Servian. And I'm going to step through today a bit about Azure DevTestLabs. So our agenda for today is going to be quite high level. I'll do a quick intro to Servian and myself before I take you through an overview of what DevTestLabs is and where you can use it. Finally, we're going to do a live deployment and usage example. I've actually got an environment. Here's one I prepared earlier, but I'll actually step through with you setting your own environment up in the portal. After that, there'll be some time for questions. And I can take you through maybe some of the setups we've done with DevTestLabs or any other Azure services as you need. So a little bit about Servian briefly. We've got 250 certified cloud consultants now, but we started in data about 12 years ago. We've operated on a very simple belief: talented technologists matter. We go for highly skilled technologists who are technical problem solvers at heart. We look for keep a pulse on the market, but also make sure that we are always looking for the newest and the greatest technologies to play with. Specifically, we're a gold partner across 6 competencies, and we do that we keep our capability strong by taking training here very, very seriously. A lot of our consultants are multi-talented, multi-certified, which means that not only do they understand the tech in the Azure and the Microsoft space, they'll also understand the journey of moving to it. And as for me, well, I'm also a passionate problem solver across technology. I lead the Azure practice at Servian, advocating Azure's unique benefits to our clients. I drive our internal training and certification, and I also provide a lot of high-level advisory on the Azure cloud to a bunch of our clients and projects. I've worked with a heap of vendors and a heap of industries. More recently, I've done some work for Coles, Telstra, AGL, Specsavers, and Wesfarmers. So today, I'll be walking you through the DevTestLabs overview. DevTestLabs is a really cool service within Azure that takes away a lot of the pain points around deploying VMs for the purposes of building out test environments for your applications, but also for building environments that you need any other VM usage for. The example I'm going to walk you through today is a data science workbench that Servian uses a fair bit in Azure to add an interface to the data platforms and data lakes and data warehouses that Azure already provides. You can also use it to provide secure remote work environments. You can also use it to build live test environments that deploy PaaS services as well, such as databases, for the purposes of either integration testing or performance and load testing through Azure DevOps. In this case, we're going to use it to provision primarily Linux VMs, and we won't cover the provisioning of Windows VMs in this example, but it is just as simple. It works hand in hand. Now, DevTestLabs does more than just allow you to deploy VMs. It also allows you to set policies that help you control and manage them in terms of how they're built, what tools and packages and software come with them when deployed, as well as setting policies around automatic shutdown and startup rules that help you keep your costs under control. There's three main ways that you would deploy DevTestLabs. Firstly, you can do it via the Azure portal, which is the example I'll show you today. But in addition, you can also use Azure Resource Manager, ARM templates, or something we're seeing more and more commonly, you can do it via Terraform as well. Now, I will give you a small note on subscription limits. Over the last couple of weeks, Microsoft have seen a 700% increase in their cloud services. This has meant that they've had to put some rules in place for new subscriptions to prevent people flooding the service and to make sure that everyone who has an existing subscription gets to continue using their things. So right now there is a soft limit on some of the free offers, and there is prioritized capacity for existing customers. That means that if you are wanting to experiment with DevTestLabs, you may need to raise a support request to get around this soft quota limit. And that's something that should usually resolve within about 24 to 48 hours, but might take longer depending on the size of your request. Just something you should be aware of, at the moment, but moving forward, not a concern, I think, long term. Without further ado, I'll move on to a live demo. So here we have the Azure portal, and what I'll quickly show you is a pre-deployed DevTestLabs environment. So we have a resource group, and in this resource group, you have a very, very simple setup. When you deploy DevTestLabs, it will automatically deploy for you a key vault. It'll automatically deploy a VNet to put your things in, or it can do during the setup. A storage account to hold things like your images and configs, and obviously the resource itself. Now, this is the interface that most people would see. You can use this interface to add virtual machines, to claim virtual machines, as well as to check on things like security alerts or manage your data disks, which I'll walk you through later. For now, though, I will walk you through the test setup of a brand new DevTestLabs environment. So first, we're going to go to the portal. We're going to search for the resource we'd like to deploy and begin the portal experience of deploying a new DevTestLabs. We're going to call this live demo lab. Put it in a new resource group. Now you have an option here where you can either use curated environments or basically just build private environments. Now this is something that I won't cover today, but this is very, very helpful if you have, say, a more complex setup where you might need to deploy multiple VMs to replicate your environment. This is helpful if you might need to deploy some web servers and perhaps a load balancer VM. Really, whatever environment you're looking to set up in Azure, setting them up through this environments way in DevTestLabs is a quick way to get what you need. Applying tags is also very simple, both to the resource, but later also into the VMs that you deploy. For now, we should just be able to go ahead and create this. Now the DevTestLab resource itself should deploy relatively quickly. There isn't much to it. In itself, it doesn't deploy any compute or VMs. It just acts as almost a policy and a logical bucket to allow you to better handle and better manage the resources within it. While that deploys, I'll jump into our existing one and I'll walk you through some of the additional features that you have around configuration, policies, and cost control. So you get some really interesting settings here. The first one is internal support, where you can basically set a short message that helps anyone using your DevTestLabs find the support they require. Here, I've just told people they can email me if they need, but you might do something here like link to a ServiceNow queue, a ticket incident log system, or maybe even to a wiki for additional information. You can also restrict the allowed virtual machine sizes, which you can see I've enabled here and turned on. What I've done is I've restricted our VM sizes down to a relatively small subset. What this does is it stops people deploying very, very large things. And for those of you that are working with data science teams, you know they love large things. They'll want to go for this 64 core, 256 gig VM, but you probably don't need that right now to do a little bit of data wrangling. So by setting limits around the SKUs or the types of VMs you can deploy, you can also keep costs down to a more reasonable measure here. You can also set simple restrictions on the virtual machines per user or the virtual machines per lab. This helps keep your overall limits down and helps you avoid approaching things like your subscription limits. Finally, you get to choose little things, such as what sort of access do people get to the VMs, what resource group do they go into when they are created, and little things like remote desktop gateways if you are building bigger environments and you need a more secure way to access them. You can also use this lab announcements feature to publish updates, new news, and let people know announcements. We've seen this to be pretty helpful for things such as letting people know if there's a change to the shutdown schedule or letting people know if there's a change to a commonly used software package. All of the identities here is, again, something you might be already familiar with if you've seen VM identities within Azure. This is usually around Azure Active Directory, say service principals, and how you authenticate with other services in the environment, such as Key Vault, a shared image gallery, file shares, etc. Now, in terms of cost control, I haven't mentioned that there's an auto shutdown policy. This is where you can configure it. So here we're seeing that we're shutting down our VMs at 7 p.m. to save some dollars. And you can also automatically send notifications before the shutdown, both to email addresses and webhooks. There is also an auto start. Your engineers or developers might need to access the VMs every morning at the same time. This will take away the manual step of starting the VM for them. So this means that it's available during business hours, if we were to turn this on. I, however, have left this one off. If someone doesn't need their VM, I'm not going to turn it on for them. Now, there's some additional things you can enforce here. This auto shutdown policy can either be enforced, user has no control over the schedule, or it can be a schedule that the user must set and cannot opt out of. Or in our case, what I've set is it's set by default, but if the user has a particularly good reason, they can opt out of the auto shutdown policy. In our case, because we're talking about data science VMs, sometimes you have long-running jobs or long-running, training of models. By turning off the allowing the user to opt out of the auto shutdown policy, we still get that cost control. We still keep our costs down normally, but it also allows a user to, do clever things if they need to. Now, the final thing I'm going to take you through here is formulas. When you build a VM, you build them from either marketplace images, the big long list of all the different VM types in Azure you can access, of which this may take a while to load because there are a lot. Kubernetes, CentOS, Sys, Debian. Now, a lot of these are various different purposes, different needs. What we're talking about today are a couple of things. The data science virtual machines in Azure are the examples I'm using today. The reason I use these is because they are just a great example of an off-the-shelf image that has a bunch of cool tools installed. Now, what if it doesn't have everything you need? What if you need more cool tools? Or you need to run some updates on the VM, apply endpoint security, or any of the other common setup steps often required? That's where formulas come in. Formulas are ways that you can take a base image from the marketplace and apply some additional steps to it. Some of the additional steps I've applied here are things like installing some things from apt-get, provisioning a swap file, and setting up Docker Community Edition. Now, you can do many more things here using these formulas and using the artifacts in formulas. You can run PowerShell scripts, you can run Bash scripts. From there, you guys can imagine that you could do multiple different configuration options moving forward. And this is a way that you can make sure that all of the VMs that you deploy through DevTestLabs have exactly what you need as you need it. The formula also helps you do things like set passwords or set public keys, as well as determine the actual size of the VM that's selected by default. So what does that actually look like for real? Well, let's deploy a VM now. And as you saw that our deployment stopped. So what we'll do now that we've deployed our new DevTestLabs, let's go over to our live demo lab and set that up for real. So you can see here it's deployed all the same things: storage account, virtual network, key vault, and the lab itself. We will set up now all of the policies required and a formula. So we'll skip through internal support, but we will set some restricted virtual machine sizes, and we'll be kind of loose with it. We'll give them, say, 4 options here. And just to be double sure, let's go and grab the V3s as well. So we can save that. Beautiful. So that will have now restricted the available choices. We're going to let our users have 2 virtual machines and save that. We're not going to restrict the virtual machines per lab because our machines per user setting should keep that nice and cheap. And we will keep the default resource group allocations. Reader access for now should be fine, and we don't need anything around remote gateway connections. We also don't need to do anything around identity. Auto shutdown should be automatically enabled. Auto start is off, and we will leave it off. And we're going to change this policy slightly. I'm going to make our users set a schedule for automatic shutdown, but I will let them set it themselves, which is this middle option here. Now we just build a formula, which is a very simple process. You first of all have to select a base image. In our case, we are building a data science workbench. So we'll select a data science VM as the base image we want to start from. We'll give this a name. We'll call this the Servian data science VM. Set a username. Now, you can select a secret from Key Vault, which is the Key Vault deployed with DevTestLabs, or you can just go ahead and set a value here. Now, we might need to change the size so it fits in with our available sizing. I don't need much compute, so this one will do for me. I've always been a fan of SSDs. Less moving parts is always better. And let's do a simple apt-get activity. What annoys me is when I log onto a system and I realize that Vim isn't there. It's just something I find kind of helpful to have. And here you can see we've added one artifact, an apt-get job, and there it is all configured. So now it should be as simple as that. If I click create formula, what we have here is a very, very simple custom formula to create a new data science VM in our new DevTestLabs. And it really is that easy. It is a way that you can now set this up, and it should just be as simple as creating a new virtual machine from that formula. From formulas. So once you create a VM, there's two processes here. The first one is the creation of VMs, which are limited per user. The next process is claiming it. Now, you can claim the VM and then release it back into the pool. This allows you to have a pool of VMs that are already deployed and ready to use at any time. So while this VM deploys, which I won't make you wait for today, but this will deploy a VM here that you are able to then see and immediately start using. Now, the data science VMs come with a bunch of tools that are very, very helpful, but we've seen this used for a bunch of other things as well. In this environment, by provisioning VMs that have all the tools on them, it can give you a secure place to work with data. But we've also seen this approach for building things such as VMs that are used for load tests, VMs that are used for some performance testing, as well as deploying everything from single VMs through to entire environments. Earlier, I also referenced secrets. So if you're finding yourself reusing things commonly, such as a SSH key or a common password, secrets is the secure way to keep those stored. You may have also noticed that there's this data disks section. This is a way of maintaining a persistent data volume between VMs as deployed. So a VM is still deploying here, and you can see it keeps us up to date as it goes. If I click on it, you'll also notice that it's got an option here to unclaim. Because I was the one that created it, it's claimed it for me. Here it is defining our shutdown schedule earlier. See it all set up. And there's a bunch of settings, obviously, that you can change that you would be not used to from standard VMs. This is the data disks I was talking about earlier. Obviously, there's an OS disk like all VMs have. And the regular settings around the size of the VM, etc. Now, this is a simpler interface than you might otherwise be used to seeing when managing VMs in Azure. This is a second advantage of using DevTestLabs to manage VMs. For people who maybe don't have the full capability of managing Azure infrastructure, this interface is a lot less scary for them. Auto shutdown is quite intuitive, auto start is quite intuitive, and a redeploy button is quite intuitive. All of these things are usually very easy to use, and we've found that people of all different capabilities have been able to use them pretty successfully. So for now, I might pass back to the team or for some questions. I think that while the lab comes up, I can log in maybe a bit later if anyone's got any questions about the data science VMs themselves. And for now, I will, I guess, cut back to the guys to help me do the Q&A.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for the great session. I'm just waiting for the Q&A to come up. 1 second. We had a few question and answers in which we have replied. Mm-hmm. It's just loading up on my machine. 1 second here. Cool. So one of the questions I can see is like, what if we run other PaaS services other than VMs, like Service Fabric cluster, Service Fabric clusters, analysis services, etc., as part of the DevTest lab? Yeah, sure.
There's also a question there I see around the integration with Azure pipelines. Yep. I'm basically happy to answer those at the same time, because to me, they're related questions. Really horses for courses here. If you have an incredibly complex environment that stitches together multiple PaaS services in Azure, and you're already writing Terraform to do that, and you have Azure pipelines to do that, it probably makes sense that you continue using that. However, if you're starting to do a new setup, or you've got an environment where you are managing a large amount of infrastructure that you don't have fully wrapped up in another configuration management tool, DevTestLabs is a great way to get started. It's a great way for you to very quickly build and deploy environments, or even single VMs, as we've seen, that gives people the tools to get rolling very, very quickly. Now, if you are finding that your environment is particularly complex and you need to deploy services that DevTestLabs don't support, then yes, sticking within that Azure pipelines will give you the additional flexibility, but of course, the additional overhead of writing and managing those entire pipelines that DevTestLabs takes care of for you. Is anyone using this in anger to enforce ISM compliance? I'm going to have to get someone to try and explain to me what ISM compliance is. It's not an acronym I've heard, unfortunately.
Hey, let me know.
I think
It's the Australian Government Security Controls.
Yeah.
Sure. So I can answer a little bit about that. So we had a conversation this morning with a government agency based here in Victoria, and the agency here in Vic is considering the use of DevTestLabs data science environment to provide protected status access to data. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it is something being actively considered currently. Ali, that is my understanding. Yep, that is exactly how we're using it. I have found as well that it's very, very good for providing virtual desktop environments, not for virtual desktop environments as such, but if you need something like temporary access to Linux servers, SSH command lines, or even just temporary access to compute to run things like simple data science jobs, DevTestLabs has been a good way for us to do that without having, giving access to developers to deploy their own thick VMs. They can deploy formulas that sort of restrict them down to more controlled, better setup, better custom environments there. Of course, you could do the same thing with Packer and Terraform and pipelines. DevTestLabs is a lighter touch way of getting it done with, less overhead and management.
We have, yep.
Yep. So I think the answer to that would be yes. If the resource is still provisioned, you would be charged for it. However, DevTestLabs has got some features here that are actually pretty cool. So if your VM is unclaimed, but it is still running, you will be charged. However, even an unclaimed VM is still scheduled to shut down at follows those policies, it follows those rules. And the data disks are actually shuffled into that storage account. So you have a way of quite cheaply holding that data. You will, yes, be charged for it, but you won't be charged the value of the spinning disk. You'll just be charged effectively the value of the saved image when the disk is offline. Feel free.
We have got one more question. How much of an overlap does this provide to Azure Blueprints? That's again from Ali.
So again, horses for courses. Azure Blueprints are a really good way if you've got an existing Azure RM code and you're looking to deploy that into multiple regions or set up DR environments. It really depends on where you're starting from. If you've got an environment that you fully understand and manage through Azure RM, and then you are looking to roll that out across different regions or build a DR site from it, or you're looking to apply, large-scale policy control above that through things like management groups or, at a subscription level, Azure Blueprints are very much that level of complexity. They allow you to solve some incredibly complex problems repeatably. What they don't allow you to do is deploy a couple of VMs very quickly. They're different tools for different uses. I would suggest, really, if you've got a large, complex environment that pulls together many, many things and must be deployed in multiple regions at once, probably roll with Blueprints. You need to manage a couple of VMs, probably roll with DevTestLabs.
Yep.
Any other questions from the attendees currently on call?
Or anything you'd like me to show you in the tool?
Yeah, feel free to send it through. There's one that's just popped through now from Vedlam. Once the lab is ready, VMs are created and ready for use. How can we start using them without engineers going into the portal?
Yeah, sure. So you probably would still need your engineers to log into the portal to actually press the buttons to deploy the things. But unless they want to automate that by poking at the API, which they can also do. But the process of logging into the VM it really depends on the VM you're deploying. If you're deploying Linux VMs, obviously it's then just a matter of SSHing into them. And you can see here, you get a FQDN to log into it. You get a custom SSH port. It reduces some of the noise because it is by default internet accessible. But this changes depending on the obviously the NSG rules that you apply to the VNets that the VMs go into. So there is ways of restricting this down, of putting security perimeters around it. But you would access it just like any other VM that was running in Azure.
And just to add to that, in case of Windows, if you have the RDP file, that can be another way of logging into the Windows machine as well.
Yep. And if you're managing multiple Windows machines, DevTestLabs does offer some really, really nice integration with Remote Desktop Gateway. I don't think it's currently integrated with Bastion yet, but I would expect that is something that will come in time.
Yep.
Thanks, Vadlam. Anyone else have any other questions for Jack or for Shri? Nope, something else is coming through. I'm going to publish it now. So the question is, any issues or constraints around domain joining this VMS?
So
Yes.
it really depends on what kind of domain join you're talking about. If you are looking to join to Azure AD, that is something you can do in the newer versions. It's tricky. No matter which way you do domain joining in this is tricky, but the Azure AD approach is easier. If you have an on-prem domain that you've expanded into Azure and you are self-hosting your domain controllers, that is something, again, it'll be it's achievable. It's achievable usually through the formulas and by adding PowerShell tasks that do then sort of like net dom domain join style commands. So it's achievable. It's able to be done. I haven't actually done a pattern with it yet, to be perfectly honest.
Fantastic, and I think it actually was in relation to an on-prem AD.
Yep.
Coming back through.
So yeah, using the PowerShell task within the formulas would probably be my first recommendation of how to achieve that. And you would just need to know the details of the DC in the environment, peer the VNet accordingly.
Yep. So Vadim has come back. He wants to see the example of RDP for the last question, where he can do the remote desktop.
Yeah, sure. So Vadim, I will show you. I think we've deployed a Linux machine here, so I can't RDP, but I can show you an SSH example. Now, I believe this one had a So what we've done then is we've used the custom SSH port that was automatically set during creation, the fully qualified domain name, and the username and password that I set earlier during setup to just SSH into this VM. So here it is ready for us. you can see we can do it. We can do a apt-get update, run the sort of commands that you would normally need to run on a Linux machine. Here you are. You see we connected in. To also beyond this process works similarly for Windows. Instead of using SSH though, you'd use Remote Desktop Protocol, where you would open it up. You would pop your URL in and set the port that you wanted to connect on, which may or may not be standard. It should work similarly to that. You'll be prompted for a username and password, just like we were here, and it should log you in using a Windows graphical remote desktop interface.
And also it allows you to download the RDP file as well, such that all the username and password is also there.
Absolutely.
So once the engineer has created the VMs, they can pass on the RDP file after downloading it, and you can just click open that, put in your password, and log in.
Yep. Now, in terms of how you onboard engineers to it, controlling access to DevTestLabs itself is quite simple. It really just comes down to this access control feature here. So as you apply role assignments, you will see that there is a specific role for DevTestLabs user. And this is what grants people access to be able to manage VMs, claim VMs, etc., without necessarily having the access to do things like set policies or grant other people access. So this is how I set up the onboarding of engineers in. And you can do that by also restricting that down to security groups, for example, to make sure that that is a proper role-based access control approach to doing so.
Fantastic. There's another question that's coming through now, and I'm just going to publish it. So is there a way to use pre-existing VNets to associate with new DevTestLabs?
Yep, there should be. So under configuration and policies for the lab, you have virtual networks, and you can see here that I am deploying into a virtual network that was deployed with it. There should also be a way of you, wrong one. There should also be an ability for me to, let's just, I clicked a bit fast, my apologies. A way for me to add a virtual network here. I can select an existing virtual network. You can see my big list of them. I will use a Databricks one just as an example, and then it becomes available for use. Now, this is going to break for me because I don't probably have the right permissions to the right VNet, etc. But you get the idea. You can add in a VNet here, either existing or new, and that will allow you to deploy VMs into that VNet.
A statement rather than a question from Vadlim here. Nice. So well done. Any other questions, crew? Or would you like Jack to expand on anything that is touched on previously? Great, good to hear. So Vadlim's all clarified, no problems. Thanks to Jack there. Anyone else?
Can we make a quick announcement if we have time?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I just want to let everyone know that every Thursday we're going to come back with new topics, 1 to 2. So we are going to send out invites. I think next week's one is on Azure DevOps and GitHub. So stay tuned and also obviously register for the next event.
Absolutely, and please feel free to provide any feedback. This is the first of the series. Hope everyone's doing well, considering the current climate. We've had to pivot quite quickly to digital formats for a lot of things. So,
and that's quite genuine. It's my fault. Also, my first time demonstrating this live.
I think the whole crew is like first time for the whole crew.
Would love some feedback.
Yeah, please don't be afraid to send it through. You've all got, sorry, this is Philip, by the way. I realize I didn't introduce myself, but you've all probably got an email from me at some point. So feel free just to hit reply back to that and just ping me a note with any feedback or any other topics you'd like to see. If there are no other questions, we can.
There is one question from Vadim. How can we provide private access to engineers in enterprise scenarios?
Sure. So there's a couple of different approaches here that will touch on that. One of the ways you can lock that down is, as I touched on, the role-based access control through Azure AD. If you combine that with something like conditional access policies to restrict access to the portal, that gives you a way of controlling some of that interface control. Now, really though, I think probably the question you're asking for real is, how do I give private access to engineers to the VMs themselves once deployed through DevTestLabs? And I think the best answer for that is someone mentioned earlier that they got Bastion to work. If there is an approach to get Bastion to work, let's get Bastion to work. Bastion's a really, really cool tech in Azure. It gives you a way of allowing your engineers to have private access to VMs that sit in a VNet without necessarily needing to expose that VM itself to the internet. That's ultimately, I think, the goal of a lot of security perimeters, and is what I would probably recommend is a really elegant solution. Something I think you'll probably see Microsoft support more and more of moving forward as they sort of roll out more support for Bastion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jack, and great question. Anything else from anyone else in relation to anything else? Alrighty, Bastion it is.
All good. Well, thank you everyone who came along for your time anyway. Even for those who don't have any questions, I just hope that this was helpful.
Absolutely, and thank you again for your time. I really appreciate that, Jack, and I'm sure everyone else does. Yeah, that's awesome. Team, everyone, thanks again for joining. Thanks for giving us your time there. And like you said, keep your eyes peeled for the invites for next week, where we go over in a little bit more detail on the DevOps plus GitHub integration. Shri, did you have anything you'd like to add?
No, all good. Just reach out to us with any questions, any topic. That's it.
Well, there's one more question that came through last minute. Buzzer beater.
When running Azure RM commands on subscriptions, will the VMs running inside DevTestLabs be treated differently? I don't believe so. I mean, they are claimable and not claimable beyond that, but in terms of actually as deployed resources, they should work as standard running VMs, and you should be able to handle them through Azure RM appropriately, including doing things like running PowerShell commands on them through the agent, integrating them with Azure Monitor for logging. All those sorts of things should still work just like a standard VM.
Fantastic. Alrighty. If that's all, maybe we'll close off the rest of the call for the moment. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Jack. You've got Jack's details, obviously, as per the initial deck. I'll just paste it again in the chat so everyone can see it in case you've got any direct questions for Jack that you want to hit up. Again, thanks everyone for your time. Jack, thanks for your work. Shri, thanks for your work too. And the presenters, Amanda and Rebecca, really appreciate you guys helping out with the Q&A also. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.